All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We are getting ready to do chapter 8 of Think and Grow Rich. I don't know why this is not working. All right, y'all. We're having technical difficulties with live streams this morning. So let me see what this is saying. We're going to start in a second. Give me 1 second, y'all. We're having technical difficulties on the app. Hey, can you hear me? All right, just keep me on the background, okay? All right, YouTube, good morning and welcome. Sorry about that, everybody. We were just having technical difficulties on POF, but we are back. And now we're getting ready to do chapter 8, a short chapter on the importance of decision, the 7th step towards riches. Accurate analysis of over 25,000 men and women who had experienced failure disclosed the fact that lack of decision was near the head of that list. This is no statement, this is a fact. Procrastination is the opposite of decision, and it's a common enemy which practically every man must conquer. You will have an opportunity to test your capacity to reach quick and definite decisions when you finish reading this book and are ready to begin putting into action the principles it describes. Analysis of several hundred people who had accumulated fortunes well beyond the $1 million mark disclosed the fact that every one of them had the habit of reaching decisions promptly and of changing these decisions slowly if and when they were changed. People who fail to accumulate money, without exception, have the habit of reaching decisions, if at all, very slowly, and of changing decisions quickly and often. So I have to say this is, I don't have millions, but I have to say this is a true statement in terms of me running my metaphysical center. I've seen a lot of centers come and go in my area. And people always ask me, because I'll have some of the center's owners book me for appointments to learn from me, like, how did you keep your center going? And I'll tell you guys, honestly, I make decisions very quick. It was not uncommon for me to get up in the morning, have an idea, call my team and say, this is what we're doing today. This is the direction we're going in. And now everybody got to shuffle and move quickly to now accommodate the new thing that I'm saying. A lot of times I would lose people, and that would be fine, because once I make the decision to do it and we do it, we all prosper. So making decisions quickly, I can actually say that that's a big part of being successful. One of Henry Ford's most outstanding qualities is his habit of reaching decisions quickly and definitely. And then if he does change them, he changes them slowly. This quality is so pronounced in Mr. Ford that it has given him the reputation of being obstinate. It was this quality which prompted Mr. Ford to continue to manufacture his famous Model T, which is the world's ugliest car, when all of his advisors were urging him to change it. Perhaps Mr. Ford delayed too long in making the change, but the other side of the story is that Mr. Ford's firmness of decision yielded a huge fortune before the change became necessary. There is but little doubt that Mr. Ford's habit of definiteness of decision assumes the proportion of obstinacy, but this quality is preferable to slowness in reaching a decision. The majority of people who fail to accumulate money are generally easily influenced by the opinions of others. How many of you are influenced by the opinions of others? Or do you listen to what people say to you and you let it go in one ear and out the other? I do that. I let it go in one ear and out the other. They permit the newspapers and the gossiping neighbors to do their thinking for them. Opinions are the cheapest commodities on earth. Everyone has a flock of opinions. If you are influenced by opinions, when you reach decisions, you will not succeed in any undertaking, much less in that of transmuting your own desire to money. Are you influenced by opinions of others, babe? Keep your own counsel when you begin to put into practice the principles described here by reaching your own decisions and following them. Take no one into your confidence except the members of your mastermind group, and be very sure of your selection in this group. Only those who will be in complete sympathy and harmony with your purpose. Close friends and relatives often handicap you through their opinions and sometimes ridicule you, which is meant to be humorous. Thousands of men and women carry inferiority complexes with them all through life because some well-meaning and ignorant person destroyed their confidence through opinions or ridicule. You have a brain and a mind of your own. Use it and reach your own decisions. If you need facts or information from other people to enable you to reach decisions, acquire these facts or secure the information you need quietly without disclosing your purpose. I do that a lot. When I make moves, I remember Cardi B made a song and she's like, I don't dance now, I make money moves. And then she had another line in a song where she was talking about, I move quietly, and I do that. I don't tell people what I'm doing because I don't need the opinions and ridicule of people to overshadow me. And once I make the moves and people are like, oh, wow, that's great for you, then I'm more open to sharing. It is characteristic of people to try to give the impression that they have much knowledge. Such people generally do too much talking and too little listening. I say that all the time. Whenever I go into conversations, I don't ever talk. I listen. I know what I know. I don't know what they know. And if I'm contributing all the time to a conversation, they're getting better. They're growing. They're advancing. I'm not growing and advancing because I already am just speaking what I already know. Listen. Learn to listen more. Keep your eyes and ears wide open and your mouth closed. If you wish to acquire the habit of prompt decision, those who talk too much do little else. If you talk more than you listen, you not only deprive yourself of many opportunities to accumulate useful knowledge, but you also disclose your plans and purposes to people who will take great delight in defeating you because they envy you. Remember also that every time you open your mouth in the presence of a person who has an abundance of knowledge, you display to that person your exact stock of knowledge or your lack of it. Genuine wisdom is usually conspicuous through modesty and silence. Let me repeat that. Genuine wisdom, how you know a wise person? When you see somebody who is modest and silent, you might be across a really wise person. Keep in mind also that every person you come in contact with is like you. They're also seeking the opportunity to accumulate money. So if you talk about your plans too freely, you can give them the opportunity to beat you to the punch by putting your goal into action before you. Let one of your first decisions be to keep a closed mouth and open ears and eyes. Keep a closed mouth, but open your ears and your eyes. As a reminder to follow this advice, it'll be helpful if you copy the following epigram in large letters. Tell the world what you intend to do, but first show it. That's a good thing. Tell the world what you intend to do, but first show it. Freedom or death of a decision. The value of decisions depends upon the courage required. The great decisions which serve as the foundation of civilization were reached by assuming great risks, which often meant the possibility of death. How many of you are willing to move for your dream? How many of you are willing to take a risk for your dream? How many of you are willing to change your whole life for your dream? Lincoln's decision to issue his famous Proclamation of Emancipation, which gave freedom to the colored people of America, was rendered with full understanding that his act would turn thousands of friends and political supporters against him. He knew, too, that the carrying out of that proclamation would mean death to thousands of men on the battlefield. In the end, it also cost Lincoln his life. That required courage. Socrates, he's a famous philosopher and one of my favorite philosophers of all time. Socrates' decision to drink the cup of poison rather than compromise in his personal belief was a decision of courage. Yeah, they gave him a cup and they told him they wanted him to compromise his belief to make the higher ups happy, if you will. And he won't compromise on who he was. And they said, well, it's either you drink this cup of poison and die, or you live with the compromise. And he was so ethically sound, he rather died. And he drank the cup happily in front of them, still confirming what he believed. It turned time ahead 1,000 years and gave to people then unborn the right to freedom of thought and speech, because Socrates was fighting for the freedom of people to think for themselves. The decision of General Robert Lee, when he came to the parting of the way with the Union and took up the cause of the South, which was a decision of courage, for he knew that it might cost him his own life, but he still did it. The greatest decision of all time, as far as any American citizen is concerned, was reached in Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776, when 56 men signed their names to a document, which they well knew would bring freedom to all Americans or leave every one of the 56 hanging from the gallows, but they took the chance. We read the history of the Revolution and falsely imagine that George Washington was the father of our country, that it was he who won our freedom, while the truth is Washington was only an accessory after the fact, because victory for his armies had been ensured long before Lord Cornwallis's surrendered. This is not intended to rob Washington of any of the glory he so richly merited. Its purpose, rather, is to give greater attention to the power that was the real cause of the victory. It is nothing short of tragedy that the writers of history have missed entirely even the slightest reference to the irresistible power which gave birth and freedom to the nation destined to set up new standards of independence for all the people. I say it's a tragedy because it is the self-same power which must be used by every individual who surmounts the difficulties of life and force life to pay the price asked. Let us briefly review the events which gave birth to this power. The story begins with an incident in Boston, March 5th, 1770. This is 7 years before independence. British soldiers were patrolling the streets by their presence, openly threatening citizens. The colonists resented armed men marching in their midst. They began to express their resentment openly, hurling stones as well as epithets at the marching soldiers until the commanding officer gave orders. Fix bayonets, charge. The battle was on. It resulted in the death and injury of many. The incident aroused such resentment that the Provincial Assembly called a meeting for the purpose of taking definite action. Two of the members of that assembly were John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Long live their names. They spoke up courageously and declared that a move must be made to eject all British soldiers from Boston. Remember this, a decision in the minds of two men might properly be called the beginning of the freedom which we of the United States now enjoy. Remember, too, that the decision of these two men called for faith and courage because it was dangerous. Before the assembly adjourned, Samuel Adams was appointed to call on the governor of the province, Hutchinson, and demand the withdrawal of the British troops. The request was granted. The troops were removed from Boston, but the incident was not closed. It caused a situation destined to change the entire trend of civilization. Strange, is it not, how the great changes, such as the American Revolution and the World War, often have their beginnings in circumstances which seem unimportant. It is interesting also to observe that these important changes usually begin in the form of a definite decision in the minds of a relatively small number of people. Few of us know the history of our country well enough to realize that John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Richard Henry Lee, can you hear me? Few of us know the history of our country well enough to realize that John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Richard Henry Lee were the real fathers of our country. Richard Henry Lee became an important factor in the story because he and Samuel Adams communicated frequently by correspondence, sharing their fears and their hopes concerning the welfare of the people. From this practice, Adams conceived the idea that a mutual exchange of letters between the 13 colonies might help to bring about the coordination of efforts so badly needed in connection with the solution of their problems. 2 years after the clash with the soldiers in Boston, Adams presented this idea to the Assembly in the form of a motion that a correspondence committee be established among the colonies, because they weren't talking to each other. They had the 13 colonies. Nobody was talking to each other. But now, because of this guy, Richard Henry Lee, writing letters to Samuel Adams and them going back and forth, Samuel Adams realized we could do this with all the colonies. And that's how we could get our forces up. Mark well this incident. It was the beginning of the organization of the power destined to give freedom to you and to me. The mastermind had already been organized. It consisted of Adams, Lee, and Hancock. I tell you further that if two of you agree upon the earth concerning anything for which you ask, it will come to you from my Father who is in heaven. Who said those words? Jesus did. The Committee of Correspondence was organized. Observe that this move provided the way for increasing the power of the mastermind by adding to it men from the colonies. In union, there is strength. The citizens of the colonies had been waging disorganized warfare. Their individual grievances are now consolidated under one mastermind. Meanwhile, the British were not idle. They too were doing some planning and masterminding on their own, with the advantage of having back of them money and organized soldiers. The Crown appointed Gage to supplant Hutchinson as the governor of Massachusetts. One of the new governor's first acts was to send a message to call on Samuel Adams for the purpose of endeavoring to stop his opposition through fear. He wanted to scare him. We can best understand the spirit of what happened by quoting the conversation between Colonel Fenton and Adams. Colonel Fenton, I have been authorized by Governor Gage to assure you, Mr. Adams, that the governor has been empowered to confer upon you such benefits as would be satisfactory, as in they were bribing him. They were trying to bribe him. Right? So that's what he came to him with. Your conduct has been such as makes you liable to penalties of an act of Henry VIII, because remember, that's who was in power at the time, by which persons can be sent to England for trial and treason and the discretion of a governor of your province. But by changing your political course, you will not only receive great personal advantages, but you will make peace with your king. They were trying to bribe him. Samuel Adams had the choice of two decisions. He could cease his opposition and receive personal bribes, or he could continue and run the risk of being hanged. Now, how many of you would take the easy route? Clearly, the time had come when Adams was forced to reach instantly a decision, which could cost him his life. The majority of men would have found it difficult to reach such a decision, but not Adams. He insisted that the colonel would deliver to the governor the answer exactly as he gave it. This was his answer. Then you may tell Governor Gage that I trust I have long since made my peace with the King of Kings. No personal consideration shall induce me to abandon the righteous cause of my country. And tell Governor Gage it is the advice of Samuel Adams to him no longer to insult the feelings of an exasperated people. What he did was he pretty much signed his death certificate with that message, because he was saying, I made my peace with the King of Kings, as in I made my peace with God. I'm ready to go if this is what it calls for. Comment as to the character of this man seems unnecessary. It must be obvious to all who read that its sender possessed loyalty of the highest order. This is important. When Governor Gage received Adams' caustic reply, he flew in a rage and issued a proclamation which read, I do hereby in his majesty's name offer and promise his most gracious pardon to all persons who lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceable subjects, excepting only from the benefit of such pardon Samuel Adams and John Hancock, whose offenses are too flagitious a nature to admit of any other consideration but of punishment. As one might say in modern slang, Adams and Hancock were on the spot. So then they hurriedly called a secret meeting of their staunchest followers. Adams locked the door, placed the key in his pocket, and informed all present that it was imperative that a Congress of the colonists be organized, and no man should leave the room until the decision for such a Congress had been reached. That was the beginnings. Great excitement followed. Some weighed the possible consequences of such radicalism. Old man fear is what they call it. Some expressed grave doubt. Locked in that room were two men immune to fear, blind to the possibility of failure, Hancock and Adams. Why? Because their lives depended on it. And that was the first Continental Congress that was held that's where they agreed to hold the first Continental Congress in Philadelphia, September 5th in 1774. Remember this date. It is more important than July 4th, 1776. If there had been no decision to hold a Continental Congress, there could have been no signing of the Declaration of Independence. Before the first meeting of the new Congress, another leader in a different section of the country was deep in the throes of publishing a summary view of the rights of British America. He was Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, whose relationship to Lord Dunmore, representative of the Crown in Virginia, was as strained as that of Hancock and Adams with their governor. Shortly after his famous summary, Jefferson was informed that he was subject to prosecution for high treason against His Majesty's government. Inspired by the threat, one of Jefferson's colleagues, Patrick Henry, boldly spoke his mind, concluding his remarks with a sentence which shall forever remain a classic. If this be treason, then make the most of it. That was his line. If this be treason, then make the most of it. It was such men as these who, without power, now this is the important part. These people didn't have power, they didn't have friends of influence, they didn't have money, but they had their courage, their bravery, and they made decisions based on their beliefs. It was such men as these that who, without power, without authority, without military strength, without money, sat in solemn consideration of the destiny of the colonies, beginning at the opening of the First Continental Congress and continuing at intervals for 2 years until June 7, 1776. Richard Henry Lee rose, addressed the chair, and made this motion. Gentlemen, I make the motion that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they be absolved from allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain be totally dissolved. Lee's astounding motion was discussed fervently and at such length that he began to lose patience. Finally, after days of argument, he took the floor and declared in a clear, firm voice, Mr. President, we have discussed this issue for days. It is the only course for us to follow. Why then, sir, do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise not to devastate and to conquer, but to reestablish the reign of peace and law. The eyes of Europe are fixed upon us. She demands on us a living example of freedom. Before his motion was finally voted upon, Lee was called back to Virginia because of serious family illness. But before leaving, he placed his cause in the hands of his friend, Thomas Jefferson, who promised to fight until favorable action was taken. Shortly thereafter, the president of the Congress, Hancock, appointed Jefferson as chairman to draw up a Declaration of Independence. Every man who signed it would be signing his own debt warrant, should the colonies lose the fight with Great Britain. The document was drawn, and on June 28th, the original draft was read before Congress. For several days, it was discussed, altered, and made ready. On July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson stood before the assembly and fearlessly read the most momentous decision ever placed on paper. When in the course of human events it is necessary for one person to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to the separation. When Jefferson was finished, the document was voted on, accepted, and signed by 56 men. Now understand that 56 men willingly signed a piece of paper knowing that it could bring them death, and they still signed. By decisions made in a similar spirit of faith, and only by such decisions can men solve their personal problems and win for themselves high estates of material and spiritual wealth. Let us not forget this. Throughout this philosophy will be found the suggestions that thought, backed by strong desire, has a tendency to transmute itself into physical. Before passing on, I wish to leave with you the suggestion that one may find in this story and in the story of the Organization of the United States Steel Corporation, a perfect description of the method by which thought makes this transformation. In your search for the secret of the method, do not look for a miracle. You won't find it. You'll only find the eternal laws of nature. These laws are available to every person who has faith and courage to use them. They may be used to bring freedom to a nation or to accumulate wealth. There is no charge save the time necessary to understand them. If you reach decisions promptly and definitely, you know what you want, and generally you will get it. The leaders in every walk of life decide quickly and firmly. That is the major reason why they are leaders. The world has the habit of making room for the man whose words and actions show that he knows where he is going. I want to read that again. The world has the habit of making room for the man whose words and actions show that he knows where he is going. Indecision is a habit which usually begins in youth. The habit takes on permanency as the youth goes through graded school, high school, and even through college without definiteness of purpose. The major weakness of all educational systems is that they never teach nor encourage the habit of definite decision. All right, last paragraphs. Definiteness of decision always requires courage, sometimes very great courage. The 56 men who signed the declaration staked their lives on their decision. The person who reaches a definite decision to procure a job and make life pay the price he asks does not stake his life on that decision. He stakes his economic freedom. Financial independence, riches, desirable business, and professional positions are not within reach of the person who neglects or refuses to expect, plan, and demand these things. The person who desires riches in the same spirit that Samuel Adams desired freedom for the colonies is ensured to accumulate wealth. All right, that's it for chapter 8. I hope you enjoyed it. YouTube, thank you so much. Be back tomorrow for chapter 9.